Every day, spend a little time in silence, because something happens in silence, conscious silence, that doesn't happen anywhere else. It's kind of like your 5-minute interview with the boss every day.
There's a Soma Mandala. If you just Google it, it's like in the Rig Ved. And that particular thing is it's a taking of a ceremonial plant for change of state science.
There are many doorways back into the mystical experience or into our true nature. Why all those doorways? Because that's the reality. And it's right there, available. All it really takes is sincerity. It takes somebody being open in a moment to have that experience.
You talking about that experience that we can tap into that more expanded state that through sunrises, through song, through love, and then you live out like with the absence of that. I feel like closing that gap is the work of life, so we can more and more live in that expanded space. Welcome to the Wild and Sacred Path, an Ayurveda Plus podcast with your hosts, Mitesh Raichata and Jeremy Frindell. Saul, thank you so much for joining us here in our little, I feel like our set's kind of gotten closer to the Today Show in some way.
We were gonna sit on the floor this time, remember?
Oh, that's right. I forgot. Next time.
Yeah, next time.
Next time.
Saul would have been perfect.
Saul can sit on the floor. Some people can't.
I can. But this is nice too. And I'm happy to be here with you both.
Yeah.
It's always good.
Saul, I didn't share this with you, but when we had the little tribute to David the other day, this woman came up to me beforehand and was telling me how much she loves Ayurveda Plus, and she's been watching all this stuff. She said, my favorite is the prana yoga guy who's doing all this stuff. She said, I showed him to my parents, and now my dad is practicing yoga and is telling me that he can do all this stuff. I said, you're not going to believe it, but he's coming here today.
Wow.
She was
That's
excited.
Great.
Yeah.
Happy to hear
Yeah,
it.
so people are watching what you filmed with us, and
Great.
it's touching people.
Great. That's awesome.
I was glad to hear it. You were the only person she mentioned specifically. So I thought it was fun that you were showing up that day.
Right. Very cosmic, actually. Yeah.
Well, I thought maybe we could start by you sharing a little bit of your background. I loved when you shared the story of meeting the monk when you were in like a pretty different phase of life.
Yeah.
And your father's friend came along.
Many lifetimes ago now, yes.
Yeah.
Like that far back?
That far back,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, so my father, who's passed now, but he was born in Burma, and my family tree is pretty mixed. There's a lot of, it was like a religious party. Everyone was invited, most came, and the family line was kind of born out of that. So I have Buddhist, Hindu, Jewish, Christian, Catholic, Protestant, all in the family tree.
You are the United Nations.
So I ran out of that house as quickly as I could and found yoga, when I was 18, because that made the most sense to me. But to get there, my father he used to practice some hatha yoga, and he was really a jnani. He had a lot of books, great collection of books, a lot of the kind of Theosophical Society and Krishnamurti and Alice Bailey, and he was really into it more from an intellectual level, but he practiced hatha yoga. So I would every once in a while see him doing like Uddiyana Kriya or things like that. So these seeds were there. And then when I was in my teenage years, I was in Malibu, and one day I walked into the living room, and there's a man there in saffron robes with big eyes and big ears and just this really beautiful presence. And it was a Buddhist monk that my father had met in Sri Lanka when he was there. And they became friends, and he basically became my first, official Dharma teacher. And so I spent time with him, here and there. I was still in my late teens in the music business, trying to give that a go. And then I decided one day that all my mentors kind of ended up in rehab, so I thought I would go the other way And I ended up leaving the music business in my early 20s and going to live for a year at this Dharma center just outside of Washington, D.C. And my teacher, Yoga Vachara Rahula, is a very unique yogi. He's been a Mahatera for, well over probably 40 years now. He's a Buddhist monk.
He's still alive.
Yeah, still alive. Very gentle, very deep. And the yoga that he practiced was Swami from South India, Swami Gitananda, Dr. Swami Gitananda, who's also passed now. But that was really my entry point into it. And I ended up trying to be in the music business again, and I ended up with this really wild sinus abscess on a music tour that I was doing, live sound, which was one of the most stressful experiences I'd ever had. It was a pretty high-profile tour.
Who was it with?
Tony Childs in Australia, New Zealand, and I had never done live sound before, and it was these big amphitheaters. And anyway, long story short, I got this kind of crazy infection and ended up having these migraines, and shortly thereafter had a brain abscess, which I was cut open. I was about 24. It's New Year's Eve, or the day before New Year's Eve. And it was really a life-changing moment. It was kind of like divine intervention. It was like a redirecting in my life path. I have Gemini rising, so I was kind of going in two directions. And it reoriented me toward yoga. So then I left and I went to live in Asia for about 3 years. Studied yoga, Thai massage, Reiki, pranic healing, and had no intention of doing that for my life path. It was just, or, for my work. And so I was just there doing that, and I came back to help my parents move to Hawaii. And basically the yoga thing was taken off in the States at that time, 90s, mid-90s in LA, and somebody said, hey, go teach a yoga class at this place called Yoga Works. So I subbed a class for Eric Schiffman, and the owner of the studio was in that, was in the class and asked me to teach. And I spent also some time at the White Lotus Foundation with Ganga White and Tracy, who were my mentors. They gave me a place to start teaching the Thai yoga massage, which I taught for many years. So that was kind of the doorway in. But my doorway is really kind of a Buddhism and yoga together. And one of my main practices right now is in Tibetan Buddhism. That's mainly where I practice along with yoga. So, and bhakti. So that's the quick version.
So, speaking of bhakti, we were at Bhakti Fest, and Jeremy and I were there, and we met one of your friends, and I've been wanting to talk to you about this actually. Okay. And he was saying that there's a men's group. You guys were all going to get together.
Yeah.
And it was
Zat.
Yeah,
right,
exactly, yeah. Exactly. And one of the things that really is intriguing me, or I wanted to talk to you about, is that Jeremy and I are always saying that I think community is, I think all three of us kind of pay attention to politics and kind of like what's going on, the ebbs and flows of that. And I think that, one of the solutions is actually us harmonizing in community, like actually creating these pockets of support systems, because we're just so separated. And whether it's like a women's community, a men's community, the youth getting together. Tell us a little bit about, that part of your life and why it's important and what your views are for having these communities.
Well, obviously, Sangha, community, is really important. One of the challenging things, I think, that we're facing in the bigger human community is the divisions that are happening. Yeah. And that was really, heartbreaking especially during COVID, but it had been happening before that. however the algorithm is, conscious, unconscious, doesn't really matter, that we, for myself, I have chose to take more of a neutral position in the sense of not unfriending people, maybe snoozing, but not unfriending. Because we do need, it's like, to me, community is the council circle. It's like everyone sharing and listening and being able to, in the group brain, take in different ideas. But it's become so much reduced down to being threatened by other views. When it's like we're all kind of, if we're sitting in a circle, I'm seeing the light, and I'm seeing the speakers hanging on that side, and whatever it is, and you have another view behind me, and when we share, we can begin to see the bigger view. And so, this is one part of it. So I think being able again to come into maybe smaller groups where we can, in the spirit of truth, satsang, begin to share in a way that we can listen to each other and we can learn. And this is very much a yogic thing, right? Maybe not always a societal thing. But this is why the healing communities are becoming so important and shouldn't be hijacked by ideologies or political talking points, groups, there's like a lot here for me, but it's also in the sharing of information, but also resources. I think most people watching this will understand that we really, it's like something's terribly wrong. But it's like on steroids. It's like a car that's like going faster and faster, and everyone's pointing the finger at whose fault it is, but yet we're all in the same car. Humanity. And being able to get yourself outside of that and start to share with other people and be in a community that's really centered around healing or wholeness or a different relationship. And this really so yoga is this maybe community where we begin to see that, like we're in relationship with Mother Nature. These principles of yoga and Ayurveda. So communities need, I guess, they need some kind of guiding intention or agreements. So because there's many communities out there. And so for me, I see more, even within this chaos that's happening, more and more people are beginning to realize that that speeding car, the one that's heading off the cliff, I don't want to be on that. So I want to get off that car, and I want to start putting my energy into other things and find like-minded people where we start to create things. And the communities that are really realigning themselves with Mother Earth, with a different way of being, with caring and sharing with other humans, not making money or accumulation of material things the main goals. That's what's interesting. And we really do need each other. We need human contact. We need to share our ideas together. You brought up the men's group, just as a little sidebar, and there's something that happens for me, like with just a group of men all showing up together, present, breathing, ready to work on themselves. That's totally different for me energetically than any other space I've been in. Not better or worse, but very powerful. And so that's why I do that. And in my own process, for better and for worse, I keep allowing myself to be guided where I can, show up and be of support, but also learn and like that.
Yeah, you want things for people that you love, right? There's certain things that you want. I know for my wife, we moved to Asheville, like 3 years ago, and whenever we've got Jeremy and I have a lot of mutual friends, but when there's a really, someone that has like nice feminine energy, I'm just like, oh, I just want this person to be friends with my wife. Like I wish for her to have community. I wish for us to have the right community. There's something very comforting. We always talk about like the village lifestyle. Like when we used to live in a village, in the evenings, if there wasn't TV, then all the men are kind of sitting on one corner, like sitting on crates and like laughing, talking about like philosophy and about life and about the weather and and then the women are also doing the same thing, and then like you've got your elders. And I just think that in this whole, even how we like choose neighborhoods, how we choose a place to live or where, or that kind of thing, it's like hardly ever is it the community or is it the what really the decision revolves around is just like very different. And I think that has really bifurcated us. And there's a big need. I think a lot of people have a need right now to be part of something, that is safe. It was really interesting, just to go back to something that you brought up. And the ashram I studied at, which I'm so grateful, my whole life is actually probably given me a perspective for the rest of my life, is what I learned in the 2 years in the ashram. But one of our first classes was Darshan Shastra. So Darshan, the science of looking. Right? And so we would take every school of thought, and then we would learn that school of thought. We would take every religion, we would learn the religion, and then it was really interesting. We would just have debates, and you didn't get to choose what side of the debate you're on. You would just kind of have, and that's like, that's a Vedic old way of kind of learning how to think. And we also learn logic, So I think that's like, our kids don't learn a lot of these things, kind of like, there's a joy in exploring a thought that's not mine, or a totally different angle, because it just creates like deeper understanding, empathy, and even just exploration, just the possibility that the opposite view of mine may be correct. Does that make sense? Even the stuff that I firmly believe in, it's like, wait a second, just to hear the other side of it, there's a certain either reinforcement of my thoughts, a refinement of my thoughts. And so it's weird how people, whether it be through media or, the powers that be there causing division purposefully, are not allowing people to think, wait a second, this group of people, they've got to have some things that I'm missing, and I think it's that kind of valuing thought for the sake of thought, valuing and a safe space. Like if I'm like, hey, look, the three of us, let's say we are friends, but say, Saul, just say what's in your heart. What doubts do you have about humanity? What doubts do you have about politics? What doubts do you have about how we're taking care of the environment or like society or social? What are the two sides of it, And for you to feel safe, I don't think there's like a deeper friendship that you can have if you're like, hey, look, no, you think however you want to. Let's put it out on the table. Let's chat about it. I know there's, people say, when you go home and you visit your family, don't talk about politics or like, like whatever the case may be. I think it's just so ridiculous in the sense that...
Depends on your family.
Huh? Depends on your... Jeremy. So, no, but I think that if it's your quote unquote family, if it's your brotherhood and someone's starting to think a different way, it's like, are we going to keep throwing people out of our social structures because that they're, thinking different than us? Or are we going to see if they have a point,
I mean, when you talk about the car that's going off the cliff, to me, a lot of that is just this isolated society where everybody's on their phones and in social media, and there is this just giant disconnect in the average day-to-day life for people. And there's a feeling that people can hide behind that in a way that when you talk about small groups, that you wouldn't say things like this in the way that people will like this. And I feel like part of the healing is stepping, like to me, that car that's going off the cliff is us living in this virtual sort of world, which has its beauty, and this is going to live in that virtual world in some way, and we hope to fill it with beauty and love and truth. But so often, and with billions of dollars of propaganda to flood it with divisiveness and all kinds of chaos, I feel like to step out of that is to come back into small groups and is to be in physical presence with people, and that you naturally just fall out of some of that crap when you are with people. Some people are still caught up in it, and it's like a transitioning out of, but I feel like for most people, I feel like the average person is decent, and when you get into community with people, a lot of what feels so crazy online just falls away really fast.
But would you disagree or agree with the fact that over the last 2 to 3 years, a lot of people are being drawn away from the normal media, and a lot of the personalities out there, they're kind of blurring. Like, you can't tell if they're left or right, if they're pro big business or not. Like, they're just inviting conversation onto their desk. 'Cause my take is that there's been a pretty big movement for people to have to hear an authentic conversation, to hear both sides of a particular thing. So I think there is a mass of people that are wanting to hear. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, or
I think everything went so far, especially during the height of COVID, that I think there is a pullback away from a lot of that like extreme crazy that was going on at that point. I feel like it has pulled back.
Right. Well, here's the thing. So I think, I mean, I agree with all that. I think that most people, like, I mean, I kind of grew up as a progressive. I think you guys probably did too, I mean, in certain ways. And, you know, 10 years ago or so, pretty much everybody knew the system was corrupt. But then, you know, like on a certain level we get, and I'm gonna just, I feel like the shadow side of identity politics is that it uses the issues that we care about to pull us in and to go along with the rest of the program. So people are being used by politics. The political system in the United States, it was Leonard Peltier, who was just released, one of the longest political prisoners, Native American, American Indian movement. His quote, "The left wing and the right wing are part of the same bird." So there's like, you know, and I totally agree with that. There's a force that we call it the asura in Sanskrit. It's the force that has kind of forgotten its light and is operating on a level of fear and greed and control and manipulation. I mean, you know, let's not kid ourselves. That energy exists in the world. And so it uses the system to manipulate Shakti, power. And so I think people are waking up to that. And I wish that we could put our humanity first and remember that. I think people are good. Most people on this planet, I think, just want a good life. They want to enjoy life. They want a good life for their children, for their family. They don't want wars. They don't want destruction of the environment, poisoning the food. And I think I'm going to say that, like, I was a big Bernie supporter back in the day, and I think, just for the record, I think he's done a lot of amazing things standing up for people. My political view now is more non-political, in that I care about the issues and about people. But I used to have this hope that, wow, like the tide is changing. And then I feel like this big manipulation came in and figured out how to turn people against each other even more. And all of the events that we're seeing, it's just becoming more and more and more divided if you stay in that car. But like you said, people are choosing to find different sources of information, choosing to live in communities, and that's the way. It's like, figure out how we're gonna create the earth that we really want, that we know is possible in our hearts and minds, and figure out how to put energy into that instead of blackpilling ourselves, worrying about things 24/7 and focusing on the negativity that's happening, redirecting our prana to focus on and build, like what you guys are doing here, creating structures that are for healing and helping people. And that's where we need to go.
I'm sorry, Jeremy. I really want to highlight what you just said. And human beings should be about the issues. There's no way you align with an entire party. It's just impossible. I'm saying, if you say I align with this party, everyone do a gut check. If you're a Republican, you believe every Republican issue, there's something wrong. And if you're a Democrat and you believe in every Democrat issue, there's something wrong, because we're thinking, living, and their issues are changing year to year. So are you, like, if you're changing year to year when someone else is changing year to year, then you're probably not thinking, for yourself, right? So I'll give you a perfect example. You brought up Bernie, okay? I think a big power, and we're not gonna just be a political podcast, but, I think we can talk about the divinization. No, I think we can talk about the divinization of politics here momentarily, but before we do that, okay, so I think the thing that everyone liked about Bernie, or most of my friends or everyone, it was like, universal health care. I think it's ridiculous that we withhold medicine from somebody who needs a medical procedure in the richest country in the world. I think that's absolute BS. Okay, so someone say, okay, Mitesh, progressive Democrat, like you just pegged me, right, with that comment, right? But man, my parents are immigrants, they came here with like hardly nothing, or at least, where they moved. And entrepreneurism is a big reason that I had the life that I had, you know what I'm talking about? And then I see so many people like grow and prosper. So if I'm pro-entrepreneur, pro-business, so, okay, though he's Republican. It's like, no, I mean, like, do you understand what I'm saying? It's like, I believe in America. I believe in free enterprise. I believe in these things and putting your hard work and et cetera. But at the same time, I also believe in absolutely universal health care, So why do I have to choose, which party? Why can't I just be a proponent of the two things that I think are great for humanity?
And I feel like it's pretty smartly split down the middle to keep everybody divided, you know? I mean, it's like love and freedom. It's like, that's the way I simplify it in my own mind. But it's like, if you're more pro-freedom at this moment in time, then you're more selfish, or you're more Republican, if you look at it from the left. And if you're more inclusivity, caring about people, you're more communist, But really, it's like the middle is where everything comes together.
I feel like the answer is stepping out so much from all of that. And that's why we're doing so much of what we're doing, as you pointed out. I feel like you need to kind of build these communities outside of what they're feeding us as the two choices, or the choice of where we are.
Right.
I feel like that choice is such bullshit that as long as you follow into that system where you're putting yourself on one side of it, you're just a tool and a pawn in somebody else's game. And I feel like for what we're trying to do is, all right, we're using the systems of technology, but we're doing it to build a world that is full of light, hopefully, and love and truth and wisdom and beauty, to just build. And it's what people are doing with small communities.
Right. And it's what people would naturally choose, if not, put into political choices and you have to choose this or that binary. Get out of that, and start choosing what is life, like dharmic, what is life affirming, what is for the greater good. I mean, one of the biggest challenges I have with the whole thing is that, here in the United States of America, we're the largest exponents of war on the planet. So no matter who's driving the ship, and I won't mention political names, but if you look and you just see the policies that have been created, it's basically the military-industrial complex, which Eisenhower warned us against, Kennedy. But the moment Trump mentioned the deep state, everybody laughed, right? But it's like, it's there. And I'm not pro-Trump or anti-Trump. It's like that's the energy that has been driving the bus, keeping everybody divided. Step outside of that and figure out a way to bring people together and start supporting that, because I have no idea how to change that. But I know that I can change my life.
And I think the less people that are feeding into all of those machines, I mean, in some ways we all live underneath those machines, whether we're going to pay taxes or maybe not pay taxes. Like there's certain things that we're all...
Jeremy, pay your taxes.
I don't know. I'm gonna file late and see what happens the next few months.
All right.
But there's certain things that we are having to participate in that system around that we don't seem to have a whole lot of real.
You got to play the game.
You got to play the game to some extent. But it's a very interesting moment where that whole game is being ripped to pieces and thrown around. And
right. It's right. And I think, but this is the direction, is like solutions. Like what is the antidote to the poison?
Yeah.
Right, which is what you guys are doing here. And I think that's the important thing, is people finding ways to put their energy, their vote, with their daily choices into the things that they believe in. And
I'm really excited about this next phase. I mean, you know, we both work with Ayurveda. You've contributed to Ayurveda, but really it's these micro communities. And, you know, the word prana, you know, it can manifest as movement, it can manifest as breath, manifest as food, manifest as medicine, all these particular things. These are human rights, right? Like the know-how about how to, you know, farm and make your own medicine, how to have your own food, have access to cows and actually have real milk that hasn't been like processed, you know? So I think, you know, we've been here for about 3 years, but there's so many friends that we've made that share the same values. I think a large part of this next phase is going to be, you know, sharing. Like how do you grow your own food? How do you have animals in your life that are, you know, helping the community? How can we tap into our own medicine? You know, how can we not have things shipped in from thousands of miles away for sustenance, you know? And then I also think it's concept like these like brotherhoods and sisterhoods and just really getting back to the basics. Cause like even in the, you know, the Bhagavad Gita, I think Krishna says that Kam, Krodh, Maya, Lobh, right? You have these shadow proclivities, okay? We all have them. And if you don't create containers to heal and to balance those and to understand and to evolve for them, then they just kind of take over. And I think that's, when you're talking about the Asura energy, that's really what it is. It's that these like kind of shadow proclivities that are not restrained, are not understood, are not healed, and then they end up with like total like dominance or control, or, you know, and that's what the fight is, you know, like for the metaphor of the Bhagavad Gita, it's the Arjun moment. Like our Arjun moment is actually now, you know? So like, and I think that part of how our families are important, but us, having a men's group, having a women's group, talking about philosophy, you know, not having hate for any group of humanity, but just like thinking through issues. I do think that that's a powerful solution.
I feel like where we are now, it's more important than ever to become vehicles of love and truth and wisdom. Everything is so divided. Everything is so, there's this heightened sense of chaos all around. And I feel like if there is a moment I can't remember if we've ever spoken about Martin Prechtel. You know Martin?
Yeah.
He talks about the way that he talks about everything in terms of seeds, and it's like a germination process that we germinate ourselves through love, through light, and that is what spreads that sense of, to you, like religion or God. It spreads person to person in that way by germinating ourselves. And I feel like if there is a moment on the world where that's not just like a fanciful, like hobby to go into, but a survival primal need, I feel like that is the gift of this time, is that it's so extreme, the need for it, that it's like there's almost nothing else to do.
Well, it's really the only way to bring more love into the world is by being that. And that's, you know, the Gandhian thing, yeah. I mean, I want to maybe share a perspective from teaching, you know, many, you know, people over the years, many groups, many situations, and just around the world, seeing that when people return back to their breath, back to a sense of conscious flow, body, mind, feelings, and start kind of get into that coherent flow together, the energy field that is created is really powerful. And on an individual level, it has the power, being a part of that bigger energy field and unity, it brings you a sense of connection and clarity, where we naturally move toward all of these positive things that we're talking about. It's like when you're in the right alignment, you move in the right direction with life. And so I think one of the most powerful things that people can do for themselves right now, and that includes me, is by having a personal healing space where you or a personal space of connection where you're shutting all that stuff out for the moment and just working on amplifying the healing energies in your own being. And that, you know, I mean, that's it right there, because then you're not so influenced by the outer.
I'm curious for you, of your decades of teaching at this point, what have you found are the tools that most effective? Like if you've kind of boiled down over, I feel like when you're earlier stages of kind of exploring practices, you have a little, perhaps a little bit wider swath, and then you kind of narrow it down to what's most effective for you, for your own practice, but also what you see helping people the most. What is it?
I mean, actual practices? Or?
Yeah. Like what do you feel like has made the most
for me
changes for you and yourself, and then also what you've seen in students?
So I found that my mind likes to complicate things over the years. You know, like if I could just learn, really complicated mantras more and more, that I would get the effect that I wanted, or I'd become enlightened, or whatever. I thought for sure by the time I was 40 I'd be enlightened, but it didn't happen yet. Or maybe it did, I just didn't notice it.
You're already 40?
Just 42. So for me, there's power in simplicity, by being really present with what you're doing. So for me, sound, being a musician, growing up with music, but even I think inherently the soul is musical in everybody somehow. But sound, a room full of people coming from all over, coming through traffic, coming in, and that first om, harmonizing everything. The power of chanting mantra, the power of song, of chant as a unifying principle. Simple movement done with breath. I mean, those, it's really kind of the core of my own practice, is just, finding what is authentic each time, even with a class. Just, what wants to happen that can bring things into alignment. The less agenda that I have with that, the more I can be there to be present, to just allow the energy to move. And that for me is the most interesting. It's like more like art. Like instead of me coming to my practice each day or going to a class each day with what I want to do and what I want everyone to feel or think or be, is just much more interesting to get into that state of flow together and see what arises. Much more fun, much more fulfilling, and feels, really beautiful. And the only thing I want to add to that is one of my teachers, Amarananda Bhairavan, he's a mystic from South India. He was a very influential teacher for me. I didn't spend a lot of time with him, but the time that I did was very impacting. One of the things he said was, every day spend a little time in silence, because something happens in silence, conscious silence, that doesn't happen anywhere else. It's kind of like your 5-minute interview with the boss every day. And so that's another thing for me, is just, especially if I'm feeling chaotic or there's a lot of stress happening or movements happening in life, just getting into that space of connection where I can just let everything get calm for a moment and do my best to, stay tuned to the guidance. So stillness or silence is also a very powerful teacher. And I think it's an art to figure out how to get yourself into that. Trial and error. And if you're a teacher, how you can kind of guide people to tap into their own connection without you there. It's the best thing,
Make yourself unnecessary.
Yeah. There's a great Khalil Gibran, in the Prophet, he talks about, I don't remember the exact wording, but basically the real teacher stands in the shade in the side of the temple, not drawing attention to themselves, but just kind of supporting the flow of what wants to happen. And something you said earlier, we're talking about communities and, what's happening in the world. We're kind of jumping around a little bit, but why not? Because it all ties in, is that sacred principle is really the thing. And the indigenous cultures all over the planet, there's an inherent sacred connection to the source. They just speak about it in different ways. And that's what we're missing in the modern world. Not totally absent, but it's often missing in what we talk about economics or policy or business or all of these things. Where is the sacred in that? Because without that, we end up just creating more and more imbalance in whatever system it is. And somehow we have to come back around to the most sacred principle, which for me is unity. Our economics, our politics, our food systems, our medicine, our entertainment, our children, if we don't have a sense of something more sacred than, just the material aims of life, then we end up with this great imbalance. And we're seeing it now. We're seeing it in the illness, the things that we talked about. So somehow, I think we all have this connection to the sacred because we're all connected to that, whatever we want to call it. Maybe we won't call it sacred, maybe you call it the universe. One of my kids, I won't say which one, told me at one point they didn't believe in God. And instead of freaking out or, because I didn't at all, it's just having a conversation to understand that process is very sacred to yourself, what you believe. And it was easy to get to a place to understand there is something more. There's this beautiful intelligence there in nature, in life. And we don't have to put God in a box that this is God.
Yeah, what is
this
God?
This white cup on this table.
Yeah.
Right.
What God do you not believe in?
Right, exactly, right, yeah. And so that mystical sense, that sense of the sacred, that's what it really is all about, I think. And each of us finding that in our own way. And as you were saying earlier, being able to have these different viewpoints, but there's a common place where everything touches.
I feel like that connection to sacred is the most precious thing. And I feel like it's been cut from so many people, or not fed, and people don't even know that it's a possibility so often. They'll feel it in some intrinsic way and in moments, but I feel like when you talk about other cultures, and who knows how much of it is this dream of what other cultures were like, but it definitely seems like the perfume of what's come from them. There was more of a connection to the sacred, and it was integrated into all aspects of life, whereas it feels so cut from so much of our life. And I feel like whatever we can do to divinize every aspect of life is the work.
Right. People say, I used to make this joke in the teacher trainings when I would do them. I'd say, people talk about demystifying yoga. Well, let's remystify it. But in a way that is relevant to each person, in a way that each person can, without dogma. Because I think when we demystify everything in our world, it's like kind of the Newtonian, scientific reductionist method where we reduce everything down to understand it, but if we don't remember its connection to the greater whole, we're left with a bunch of separate parts, and all the doctors then just focus in their one area without seeing the whole. Not all doctors, or I'm just using that example, but it's like the whole is so important, to see the whole, to zoom out, zoom in, zoom out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the things that, a lot of teachers or sessions or immersions, or lineages for that matter, that would be a little bit controversial. There's if you do this step, then now you gotta do this step. After this step, now you gotta do this. After that, you got these 300 steps of this, then you got this thing, then you learn this, then you can study this book, then you can do this retreat, then you can do this thing. It's okay, so it just, I think sometimes it's just so overwhelming. It's so overwhelming, or the hoops that people put out there, to, whatever you call it, enlightenment. The reality of the matter is, I think that in the containers that we create, is that someone feels that there are miracles going on all the time. If you just breathe in fully, you breathe out fully in a certain manner, and then the mind just clears. And is that a miracle? It's kind of like walking on snow, the miracle of a sunrise, or a mist, you know, where you can't tell if it's like raining or is it not raining, and it just hits your face, or a memory, or falling in love, or all these things. I think the divine is so interwoven into so many moments in our day, like in right now in our day, like when we feel love, when we feel connection, and that it just gets people, it gets watered down sometimes if they feel they got to climb this thing that is just like, no, it's like, you know, you're a sliver, the veil's right there. You could trip and fall through the veil, hit your head, and just be in the glory of the divine. But it's so right, it's just so close to us, and that these miracles are going on every single moment. And so I do think one of the things of a good teacher is not that we don't acknowledge the suffering and acknowledge the, you know, sometimes the darkness or the dark night of the soul that can be prevalent, right? But also to acknowledge how close we are to these miracles and divinity. I think that's just so important. And you know, and I know in some of the containers that we hold, a lot of it's like, you just tell people that they're this close, there'll be some old Kriya or something, or they'll go for a walk and they slip into this beautiful space. And I think that contextualize their life and their future in the next year, the next 6 months. Does that make sense? So I do think that I like the demystifying thing a little bit, you know, as well, because it just, I don't know. I think we're surrounded by miracles. They're just all around us. Yeah.
But that's mystical. Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah. I think, you know, the linear mind, you know, sets up enlightenment as something outside of oneself that you have to journey towards. Yeah. So there's always 1,000 steps, you know, and really that seed is within all of us always.
I like the kind of Ramana Maharshi take where it's not a adding on of things, like it's not a stepping up, it's a removal of everything that we hold in front of us that shields us from that. I'm not the body, I'm not a man, I'm not this, I'm not that. It's just surrendering into that state of all, rather than this like staircase we're climbing towards something. It's just, we're already that, we're just removing the things that trick us to thinking we're not that.
So if one believes that there's an intelligence to the universe, like to me, one of the most mystical things you can do is like watch the sunrise or sunset, or like spend an hour in the forest, like with nothing around. You can't, in my experience, I can't help but notice that there's just this beauty and this field, and I'm intrinsically a part of that by witnessing it, right? The further we get from that flow of life, rhythm, the flow of, you know, kind of prana or life force or existence, the more separated we get and we start to make decisions in that separation, the more separation we create, the more suffering we create. So, you know, one of the threads that we've been talking about today is just kind of the suffering and all the stuff that's going on and the different ideas about who's to blame and, you know, which group we're supposed to be a part of and all that. And it's like, the whole thing is like getting free of that mindset, like we were talking about earlier. And each one of us in this natural, Bob Marley, a natural mystic, right? Natural mysticism that we all have, and helping children remember that feeling, that connection that's innate to them as they grow up, not conditioning it out of them with tech and drugs and all the stuff that's happening. But the closer we remain to that flow of intelligence and source for everything, to me, that's the way.
I mean, the simplicity, the three examples you gave were the sun rising, the sunset, and walking in nature, walking in the forest. I feel like that, living in the natural world, we just enter into that flow so
totally
naturally.
Because
but
we're
all disconnected from it in so many ways. I feel like however they can keep us out of the forest. I think there is a they.
We, they, us, they. There is no other.
Yes. But there is a
yeah,
deep
there
state.
is. But there- well, okay.
Wait, let's just add those sentences together. There is no other, but there is a deep state.
There's a deep state of being.
The deep
It's a deep state of being.
The deep state of
That's
being.
what-
There you go. Yeah, that's good, Saul. Smack him around a little bit. I like that.
But okay, so this is the really fun thing for, I don't even want to use the word yogi, but somebody who's like wanting to kind of wake up within the play. So one of the things I learned from my teacher, Nandu, is that a tantric mind, he's a tantric teacher, you have to be able to hold paradox. Heaven and earth, sun and moon, Republican and Democrat, left and right, or all the things, mind and heart, and not go binary and close one down, and right? You keep both because that's the play of life. So somehow waking up in this experience, we have to be able to find a space where we can just reflect on things, be able to kind of play with consciousness a little bit, not get so caught up in our viewpoints, not caught up in our life. And what does that, for me more than anything, is meditation. It's creating space in your being to be in the dance. That's more I want to use this metaphor of the dance. There's that great Ram Dass book, The Only Dance There Is, the Nataraj, right? This idea that creation itself is a dance, and everything's happening all at once. And if we can, and we're possibly where we're going, is we're heading into a space of really quantum awakening and awareness on this planet. But to get there, we've got to go through this squeezing of what doesn't work. We've got to wake up to realize that war is not only destructive and terrible, but we don't have to do it anymore. We can choose another way of being together, you know? So the more people vibrating back to what you said earlier about love, and so on a daily basis, the universe doesn't really care whether you're Republican or Democrat. It's what are you vibrating at? Are you vibrating from a place of love and care for others, truly, not just in your group, or are you not? Because the universe responds to energy. So each one of us just spending a little time each day, like tending our own garden, our own place, then I think that's the best medicine that there is.
Yeah, my wife and I, you know, we take 2 or 3 vacations a year that we do in silence. So we just
With
rent a
each other.
cabin somewhere. We're both there. We don't talk to each other. So we write on little Post-its, or we just communicate like that. And so we have no TVs or nothing. We're just quiet. We may have some sacred books around. We meditate for a good portion of the day. We go for walks in nature. We're kind of in our own little worlds, you know, but one person cooks one day, the other person cooks another day. So it's really sweet. Actually, it's the best vacation ever. I'm like, no matter where I've traveled in the world, it usually comes down to those. And in those times, you know, sometimes, you know, you ask yourself, is the divine whispering to me? Usually divine is, you know, and then when it's quiet for like a week or 2 weeks, then I think the volume kind of goes up a little bit. You're like, because then you realize the divine's always like whispering to you. So this might sound a little crazy, but in those, you kind of have those moments like, okay, what's going on? I've been quiet for 10 days or 11 days. Like, you know, what am I really hearing and what is being thought in my head? So whether it was my own thinking or whatever, it was really beautiful. I had, you know, I felt like I was talking to the divine at the beginning of time, and I said, well, why? Why this creation? Why? Why the universe? Why the Big Bang? Why all the suffering? Why all the worlds? Why all the planets? Et cetera, et cetera. And then what I heard the whisper was, remember, we decided to do this together. You know, like for the Leela, for the joy of the human condition or existence. And that, whether that was whispered in my ear or whether I came up with it or whether it was a daydream, it has served me so well, is that we chose this. We chose these like cycles. We chose this existence or whatever the case may be. And it's just served me really beautifully, you know, in the sense that a lot of times when we look at politics and we look at society, and we needed it all. You know, we needed the shades, we needed the deep state, we needed the struggles, because without there's no joy in the victory. There's no joy in the awareness. There's no joy in the realization if we didn't have the asuras and we didn't have the deep states and all that. And we chose it. No one watches a movie that's boring. You know, we chose that. So however that whisper came about, it's just really contextualized that, dude, we chose this. Like you chose it, we all chose it, you know? And that's the magnificence of the miracle of existence, right? And so now it's just the game within it.
I mean, I feel like every story is this overcoming of impossible obstacles, and that's what creates the hero. The stronger the obstacles, the greater the enemy, the greater the hero becomes, the stronger you become. And I feel like that's the story that's been told for as long as humans have been living, and this is just our version of it.
So until we change the story, the collective story,
or we're just wired for this, like
that's what I mean.
this process of conflict, resolution, overcoming, like the strength. The stronger the obstacle, the greater the resistance, the stronger you become. That it couldn't be another way, maybe, in this whole dance of life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think I'm so in tune with that. And okay, Saul, I don't know. I've never talked to you about this. I'm not sure whether you've done psychedelics or not. Like, I'm not sure. I haven't met a person in Asheville who hasn't, you know, so like, it's just like, you kind of
live in Asheville,
by your own community, you know? So I'm not sure if, you know, what your philosophy on that is, but that kind of makes this podcast interesting. What's your take on having all the world leaders do psychedelics? A lot of people, what's your thought on that?
Yeah, and have it televised in the same room.
Yeah. No, seriously, all jokes aside, you know, what's your thoughts on that?
I wasn't joking.
Oh. Televise it.
Well, so plants, sacred plants, have been a tool of divination and awakening for, you know, millennia. And I have done psychedelics. I don't do them every day, every other day, no.
Once a week's fine.
You know, I've had periods in my life where they have called to me, and it's been, you know, a part of a process for me. And I think that they are for some people if you're called to them. I wouldn't want that to be my main spiritual practice every day, you know, or regularly. But I think it is really important and done in the right way. And so that's kind of a big thing for me, is somebody who really knows how to hold the space for you in a sacred way, because there are also a lot of energies that can come into your experience, that bad trips in certain ways. But I think that sacred medicine done, plant medicine done the right way, for those that are feeling called to do that, is very beneficial. For leaders, I think it would be incredible to have more, you know, of the world leaders really tapped into the sacred and the awesome responsibility that you have as a leader, and not just serving your special interest. It'd be incredible. So I think it's a very legitimate thing. There's even one of my teachers, Ganga White, gave me a whole manuscript many years ago about how, like, the Eleusinian mysteries of the Greeks and then the Soma culture of India. Some people believe that the Soma beverage was a psychedelic. So it gets pretty out there.
Well, I'm glad. There's a Soma Mandala. If you just Google it, it's like in the Rigved, and there's actually like thousands of like sutras, and it literally says, this is where you find the plant, this is how you prepare the plant, this is how you cook the plant, this is when you take the plant. So like, I mean, you know, a lot of, like, you know, Soma, is it indigenous to the human being? Absolutely. I mean, I think that's the whole point.
Soma is psychedelic in this case, or just general?
In this case, it is obviously a plant that is not indigenous. It's something that is taking from and preparing a preparation and drinking it. Because you know, I've read a lot of things about it, but now actually going back to the root text. So it's I mean, like I said, people can Google it. It's the Soma Mandala, and it literally is in the Rig Veda. And in that particular thing, it's a taking of a ceremonial plant for change of state science. Now, again, you know, I think the whole concept of yoga is that you can have that indigenous soma through a kriya or something like that, or by doing a practice where it can get released, and you basically see the subtle, see beyond this body, right? And so I think it is there. It's there in the Vedas. I mean, if someone considers that like a root text, I think it's pretty overtly there. And even in the Gita, there's 2 mentions that I know of where they talk about Soma as a plant, So again, it's like separate from the human being or whatever the case may be. And the second reference, you could read it anyway, is indigenous through a kriya. So, but I think that it'd be, I've thought a lot about this because a lot of people are talking about this right now, in the podcast. And if you have the world leaders, do psychedelics, I think that if all the world leaders realize that I am beyond this body and there are realities that are subtle in nature, then maybe they're not only acting from, because if I'm acquiring power, if I'm acquiring money, if I'm acquiring certain things, it's kind of predicated on the paradigm that I am this body and these are my objects. Does that make sense? But when you have an experience that, wait a second, maybe I'm beyond this body, maybe we're all spiritual beings and have it in this physical manifestation, I think that would definitely change governance. So who knows? Maybe it's like a pipe dream, or one of us can break into the UN, or whenever they're all getting together at the G20 summit and spike their punch or something. Might be worth it.
Yeah. Well, maybe there's some collective psychedelic happening right now also. Just like,
feels like it.
Feels like it. Yeah. I mean, and just to say also that I think there are many doorways back into the mystical experience or into our true nature, the true nature of things. So it could be through beauty, the sunrise, sunset. It can be through art. It could be through all the modes of taking information in. A chant, a class. Why all those doorways? Because that's the reality. And it's right there, available. All it really takes is sincerity. It takes somebody being open in a moment to have that experience. And one of my mentors and friends, another one who left the body, Shamdas, he gave for me, the most beautiful and simple definition of Maya once. Because we have this idea that Maya in the yoga tradition can mean illusion. It's also the name of the goddess. It can have different meanings. But Maya's illusion, so like people grappling with this idea, my life is an illusion, life is an illusion. But he says, Bhakti philosophy and true Vedanta is that the Maya is actually referring to the part of your brain or consciousness that is believing in separation and thinks that that's real. That's the Maya, the illusion that only a little part of this is real. That actually love, bhakti, is the deeper reality of everything. It is right here in everyone and everything at every moment. And that's why in bhakti yoga, that you want to be a das, a servant of that love. You want to be in the energy of love, which is really what we all want to be in anyway, because that's the right mood. Love is the awakening. And so that Maya doesn't mean that our life is an illusion. It just means that separation is an illusion.
He has such a nice way of putting things.
Yeah, way better than I just did.
No, that was beautiful.
But yeah.
One thing I was thinking is you talking about that experience that we can tap into that more expanded state that through sunrises, through song, through love. And I feel like the gap between being in that expanded state and how we operate in a normal day-to-day when we're not feeling that expansion, holding the strong living in service of dissolving the gap. And someone's like, when you touch that expanded state and then you live out with the absence of that, I feel like closing that gap is the work of life, so we can more and more live in that expanded space. That's something that I've been thinking about lately. Once you taste that sweetness of that more expanded, it's sweeter than all of the other things we run after all the time. And I feel like whatever we can do to close that gap and to live more in that space. And I feel like bhakti is, when I interviewed Sham Das for One Track Heart, the film I made about Krishna. I had a bunch of fun
Good
little
film, by the
adventures with, thank you, fun adventures with Sham Das. I really liked him.
Yeah. He was one of a kind, that guy.
He's a very unique guy.
Amazing.
But we were at the Omega Chant Festival in Rhinebeck. It's like kind of like a Bhakti Fest, but the East Coast version. And he pointed at the room. He's like, there's 500 people in that room that are in there singing these chants. And to each one of them, it means something completely different. Everybody thinks that they're doing something different. There's 500 different versions of what that practice is. But you get in the room and it doesn't matter because all those ideas dissolve. And we're just in that chant together. It was such a nice way of kind of flipping, because,
yeah. And that's really amazing. Like all these little individual sparks, beings, souls, having their own individual experience, but part of something, part of one. When you said earlier about your thought about, that we all chose this, and that, kind of your divine dialogue, Arjuna, that you were having. There's a passage in I found it in various texts. I found it in the Kabbalah. I found it in the yogic text. But it's this idea that the one becomes the many to experience itself. And that's really powerful when you also think about something like the Big Bang theory, right? Is this like somehow we go back through time and space, and we can measure this incredible implosion of consciousness because it's still happening, it's still reverberating. The one became the many in order to experience itself. And we're all tripping. We're here on this incredible experience called life. Everyone's having their own thing. And through all this upheaval, chaos, war, and beauty, there's something else happening right now, something moving us somewhere. And what could that be? Oh my goodness,
I'm glad we're videotaping this, because I really, really enjoyed Jeremy talking about after you've tasted something, you kind of feel like you want to narrow the gap and be more and more within that vibration, because we know that's the vibration that makes us whole. I thought that was really beautiful, but there's two things. One is I feel like we're getting sucked back into that space, There's the beautiful story of that, Shiva is meditating and there's no existence, there's no planets or the sun or anything. And then all of a sudden there's just this little volition, and at that juncture, Shakti, Shiva and Shakti comes out of his heart, and then you have this expansive existence. And it's a love affair. It's like the whole thing, the Maya, it's actually the most beloved or the beloved was the existence and the knower of the existence, right? Because she came out of his chest. And then through that love affair, the distance becomes less back until she floats right back into his chest. And that was the Leela, that was the magic that came about. And I feel that we're all being drawn. It's really, the first time when I just listened to you right now, it became very clear to me that ever since we became conscious as even babies, I bet you we've been being drawn back into this space, because it's such a natural thing. And last thing, because both you and I like Aurobindo. When I was 19, I was reading Aurobindo, doing very different.
Is it Aurobindo?
Yeah, so it might have taken me a day to read a paragraph, but I was reading it. But one thing that
still takes me that.
Yeah, one thing that really just rocked my world at that age was, and I don't remember what book it was in, but he said, whether it's a drunkard or a gambler or a criminal or a saint or a householder, he said, all the activities that people do, they do because they're looking for the divine. The drunkard looks at it in a bottle of alcohol. The gambler looks at it in the next bet. The householder, and like whatever the case may be, and he goes, but it's a mirage for all of them involved. Like they're all looking for the divine. They, not this, okay, not this, not this. And so I kind of feel, it's like, I really like the way you articulated like the concept of the gap, But I feel like maybe we're all being sucked back into the divine. It's just that people are just at different stages, or, you know, whatever the case may be. Some people are running, what'd you call it? The deep state, you know? They're looking for the divine in the deep state, but they'll realize it's not that at some point.
I feel like it takes a
Wait, which deep state we're talking about?
Either of them.
it takes a commitment to moving in that direction, because so much is pulling us in other ways. I feel like we have to be committed, and those tastes that we get, whether it's through psychedelics, whether it's through a sunset, allowing those to keep reminding us of our potential.
I do want to plug one thing, though. It's like, I think the concept of ritual within family units, within men's groups, within businesses, I think that it's just critically important to create containers to melt back into that space, even for split moments during the day. I know, you know, at work, Jeremy has started this ritual that we do for 15 minutes every day, where we just sit quietly. There's a bell, you know, and then we sit there. But I feel that, you know, that does open up a portal. It was like 15 minutes where anybody who's at this campus that we work at, you know, who's free, we all come together, we sit down and we do that. And so there's also a power of ritual, you know, in all dimensions of our lives. And I think that that might be one of the solutions as well, as having these containers. Because when you're at work, if you feel like it's bifurcated from my spiritual existence, then I think that gap you keep that gap at bay, right? But when you have these like moments and these rituals throughout your day and throughout the different activities that you're doing, you know, it's pretty powerful.
I feel like rituals remind us of our priorities, that the prioritization is baked into the ritual. Mm-hmm. So doing it, it's like a continual reminder of what's really important.
Yeah. So I got a circle there. So one of the concepts or words that influenced me the most is a Sanskrit word ritam. So for those that aren't familiar with it, you'd probably spell it like R-I-T-A-M. That's the English, you know, phonetic translation. But ritam is the concept of divine order or cosmic flow, the evolving order or the cosmic rhythm. And so from that word ritam comes the English word rhythm, right, ritual, renew, anything with recycle, reconnect, relink,
Religion.
religare,
Yeah.
exactly, religion. And it's all in that circle. So the ritual, a sense of rightness or flow or order or reconnecting to that, is through the ritual of the yoga practice, the morning coffee with the birds singing, or a moment of silence together.
We're sitting together amongst friends.
Sitting together, yeah. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, one of the great things is, like, you know, we're doing this, we're sitting down and talking, and really, even if no one ever sees this podcast, you know,
Or makes it to this point in the
or
podcast.
makes it to that point, you know, I don't care, you know. It's just really beautiful being able to just to sit down and in like a brotherhood and just chat and be ourselves. You know, it's pretty magic. This is our little ritual. It's magical.
Yeah. So thank you for being part of our ritual, Saul.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you for making me the sacrifice of the ritual today. No, it's
Who told
really
him
good.
about that part of the show?
Put out the candles.
Yeah.
Thank
Sense
you very
of the
much.
sacred. That's really all. And everybody finds it in their own way. And yeah, I mean, you know, people want peace. People want a world that works for everybody. You know, I really believe that in my heart. If I could just say one more thing. So, in my linear mind, I have no idea how we're going to get there, because the complexities of what's happening on the planet and with geopolitics and all that stuff. But here, I know we can. And that has been my experience of just seeing people from all walks of life and social caste and all that, just breathing, being of one heart. And so if we can keep that frequency alive, like the more people on the planet vibrating in the frequency of love, it keeps that. that's why fear is a trick. In that way, right?
In our little worlds, whatever we can do to keep
Amplify, yeah. Like what you said earlier, just, be in that vibration of love and connection, or whatever it is that you want to feel the world needs. Be that. Be the change, yeah. That's it. Love is the medicine.